for joining. So today's class is about CRO selection criteria, evaluation, and establishing the relationship. So our objectives for this session are to review key questions and selection criteria during CRO evaluation and RFP review process, explain the importance and various tools necessary for establishing clear expectations, communication, and objectives for the collaboration, and to address techniques and oversight requirements to allow for a high-performance alliance. So the first thing I'd like to do is make sure we're all on the same page when we talk about CROs. It is essentially a contract research organization, not necessarily a clinical research organization, which means that although most of our partners are embedded in clinical practices and are very familiar with the regulations as written, 21 CFR, and the parts that would apply, it can be any vendor. So it can be a laboratory that we're hiring for their knowledge of GLP. It is a manufacturing facility for their knowledge and experience with GMP. Or it could be, again, that we're selecting a CRO to do the monitoring or help us write a protocol, and they should be very familiar with GCP. So it's defined as a person or an organization, commercial, academic, or other, contracted by the sponsor to perform one or more of a sponsor's trial-related duties and functions. And this is a very key point. Again, there are not a lot of regulations about CRO selection or management, but what the regulations do say, what we do have in writing, is that a sponsor may transfer any or all of the sponsor's trial-related duties and functions to a CRO, but the ultimate responsibility for the quality and integrity of the trial data always resides with the sponsor, and the CRO should implement quality assurance and quality control. And this, again, is something that we really need to be very, very aware of when evaluating and selecting a partner. Do they have internal quality control measures? Do they offer it as part of a standard part of their service that they will be, for example, doing audits on 10% of all sites in a trial? Or do they audit the vendors that they are working with, for example, even the IRBs perhaps? And the reason I mention IRBs is that we've seen an increase in inspections of IRBs globally within the past few years. And it has come up, again, as I've seen the several evaluation forms and reviewed audit responses or audit reports from different organizations, that, again, there's an expectation that CROs are actually vetting their vendors. So it's a vendor vetting vendors, but when we trust a partner or we sign up for that collaboration and we transfer those responsibilities in writing, we need to ensure they have quality systems in place. Then the other piece of that is any trial-related duty and function that is transferred to and assumed by a CRO should be specified in writing. And again, this is an area where we can fall short by just allowing the CRO or allowing in our transfer of obligations to have very bucket-type activity. For example, we may be delegating project management. But if we don't define specifically what goes into project management, we could end up with tasks that are overlooked or not handled appropriately. So does project management involve recruitment handling? And if it involves recruitment management and handling, what does that entail? Does that include the project manager intervening on recruitment action plans, or is that delegated to CRAs? Is that part of the CRA's role? Do CRAs have enough hours in that budget to match the transfer of obligations, to be calling the sites on a regular basis, to establish formal recruitment action plans? Again, it must be in writing, and we should be very, very specific about what tasks are being transferred. One example that I'll give of something that came up at an end-of-study audit, I was working on behalf of the sponsor managing a CRO, was that the CRO was managing the trial master file. That seems very clear, transferred in writing. But the CRO was not managing any aspects of the safety management for the trial. That was handled independently by the sponsor, and they had contracted directly with an independent medical monitor for the trial. So when the trial master file was inspected at the CRO, it was noted they didn't have a lot of the safety correspondence. There was no emails from the medical monitor to the sites and back and forth, when in reality, we knew that there had been quite a bit of correspondence. So the issue was, well, why didn't you keep this as part of the trial master file? Well, because when you looked at the paperwork, the transfer of regulatory obligations, safety management had not been transferred to the CRO. It was being retained by the sponsor. So the assumption was the sponsor was going to retain all of that documentation as well and then add it to the final transfer of trial master file at the conclusion of the study. There was a lot of assumptions, but nobody asked at the beginning, and this didn't come up in the middle of the study. So it wasn't until the end that we then had to go back and search for previous emails. We had to ask sites to provide copies. We had to go back to the medical monitor's emails and ask for things to be printed out. And certainly you can imagine what would have happened if we'd had an FDA inspection prior to the end of that trial. So again, must be in writing, and it must be clear specifically what tasks will be maintained by each organization. And I think it becomes even more challenging when we have tasks that are shared, because again, ultimately, whose responsibility is it? Well, according to the regulation, the ultimate responsibility would lie with the sponsor. But if we're the sponsor and we've got joint responsibility, let's make sure that it's perfectly clear we know what it is we are supposed to be collecting, doing, overseeing, writing, documenting.